inspiring interviews with today's top landlords. This is the Rental Income Podcast. And now, Dan Lay.
I've got a really interesting podcast for you today. Joining me on the show from Buffalo, New York is Andrew Schultz. Andrew runs a property management company, and his company does a really good job of attracting really good tenants. His tenants tend to stay for a long period of time. They pay on time, and he does very few evictions. So I want to find out exactly what he's doing, from how he advertises the properties, what he's looking for in a tenant, and how he screens them. So we'll talk to him on the first part of the show. And then on the second part of the show, I'm going to bring back on Steve White, who you may remember from episode 110 from back in May. And Steve is an expert at tenant screening. So I'm going to have Steve review an actual application for one of Andrew's applicants to see if we think we should approve this applicant or not. So I think this is going to be really interesting. Let's take a really quick break. We'll come back in 30 seconds and we'll meet Andrew.
Are you looking for a roadmap to financial freedom? If so, we have a solution for you. Norada Real Estate is offering a limited number of free strategy sessions to help you get out of the rat race. Learn how you can create wealth and build monthly passive income. To set up a time with one of our knowledgeable investment counselors, simply go to noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
Hey, Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what makes your property management company so successful?
Sure. I'm an associate broker with Realty Edge here in the Buffalo, New York area. We manage about 120 doors across our region, and we're kind of growing. We have pretty stringent systems that we use for just about everything that we do. And because of the fact that our systems are so strong, it allows us to prevent bad things before they happen. For instance, our tenant screening is so strong that it prevents us from placing bad tenants, which is what keeps our eviction rates low, which apparently it's significantly lower than the national average, from what Steve was just telling me. And it's all about processes with our company. So the sooner that you can build and implement a process, the sooner you can make your business run a little bit more smoothly.
Okay. So let's take a kind of a walk through your whole process. So when you have a property that you're looking to fill, tell me about how you market that property. Like, what are there certain places where you're going to attract better tenants than other places?
I would say that our big three lead generators that we call them would be Zillow, Trulia, and HotPads. The nice thing is if you go to Zillow's website and set up a landlord account to post rental listings and things like that, they have the ability to cross-post that to Trulia and HotPads. So it's basically you input the data once, you never have to input it on the other two sites. It just pushes it out automatically, which is fantastic. Those three sites generate probably about 95% of our leads, and I would say that those are the highest quality rental leads that we receive. We also do a little bit of marketing on Facebook in some of like the local, like the garage sale groups are great places to post apartments because people are always on those sites looking for anything, whether they need a dining room table or they're trying to find an apartment. People just sit there and scroll those sites constantly. So that's a good place to generate leads. And then we were using Craigslist for a long time. We've recently, I would even say recently, it's been probably about 2 years ago, we stopped using Craigslist altogether. It just seemed that the quality of the lead dropped significantly with Craigslist for whatever reason. I think people are just more akin to using the apps on their phone to find things. And Craigslist has just kind of fallen by the wayside in that regard.
That's interesting. And it wasn't always like that. Several years ago, Craigslist was good. But recently,
I mean, we used to get great leads off of Craigslist. Craigslist used to be the place to go when you were looking for an apartment. And we used to love the site because you could take and build a really nice HTML template into their site that had images and colors. And you could make it really, you could customize it. You could make your ad look like your own. Then they made some changes to their code in the website. And now you can use like bold and underline, and that's about it. And it really... You can't do anything with colors. All you can do is post like 4 or 5 images, and they have to be a certain size. It just, when they made those changes, I think they lost a lot of their people that were looking for apartments. The straw that broke the camel's back for me, the reason that I ultimately stopped using Craigslist, we had a building that we renovated, a really nice house, 3-bedroom, 1-bath carriage house behind one of our others duplexes. somebody took my photos because I didn't watermark them, which was mistake number one. Somebody took my photos and kept relisting the apartment for like $400 versus the $950 that we were trying to get out of it. And I kept getting phone calls from people. Hey, somebody's trying to scam me. And are you trying to scam me? Blah, blah, blah. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't have time to sit and put watermarks over every single image I post on the internet. Craigslist seems to be the haven for scammers. And I'm like, this just isn't worth it. I'm spending more time chasing scammers than I am chasing tenant leads. I don't have time for that. So.
Right. So when someone finds a property that they're interested in, are they basically like do they call you or are they emailing you? Like, do you direct people a certain way?
You know, if they're coming in off of Zillow, Trulia, and HotPads, if they're using the app or if they're using the website, they basically have to put their information in once. And every time they see an apartment they like, they just hit a button that says, oh, I'm interested in this. Send me more information. So it's not that they're selecting one or two apartments. They're probably going and looking at an entire township or an entire neighborhood and requesting information about 15 apartments at once.
Right. Okay.
So it depends on the market. Some markets, there's in Buffalo, there's more apartments than there are renters. But in our neighborhood, we find ourselves chasing a lot of times trying to get the tenants to call us back or whatever. So what I do is when I get an email, it'll usually give me their name, their email address, their phone number, and sometimes a little bit of information about them. I'll always make the phone call first, and then I'll follow up with an email. And then I try to follow up the next 2 days with a phone call and an email so that they're getting 6 touches essentially. A lot of times, if you're like a private landlord, not somebody who's doing it as a company, you'll get people that want to text you. And that's, if they're texting you, then you might as well text them back. People seem to be most comfortable staying within the realm of how they contacted you. So if they texted you, they want to text back. If they emailed, they want an email back. If they called, they want to call back. So
then do you set up the showing then? Like, so if someone emails you, you'll set up, you'll make an appointment to go out there and show them the property. That would be the next step, I guess.
Yeah, for the most part. If it's one of our more popular apartments, what we'll do is we'll set up like an open house. I know that on Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. I'm going to be at this property. I'll just cram as many people onto that one showing as I possibly can, just so that I'm only making one trip to the property. If it's something that's a little bit slower, maybe it's a little bit more expensive unit so that the tenant pool is a little bit smaller. Those I tend to schedule on a by appointment basis, essentially.
You know, I think that's really smart because you can waste a lot of time going out there and meeting someone at a property and they don't show, and you know, that just wasted an hour of your time to drive out there. And then, so the next step then, if they like the property, then they would fill out an application. Is that?
Yeah. So if they come out for well, I guess we should back up. I pre-screen everybody before they come out. So I basically have a series of questions that I ask them. I basically tell them that we're looking for a net income, an after-tax income of 3 times the rent. So I'll tell them we're looking for a net income of 3 times the rent, which is dollar amount. Because a lot of times they don't want to do the math in their head. I already have the math in my head. So I just tell them we're looking for a net income of this amount. We're also looking for a target credit score of at least 620. That's kind of our cutoff point. And Steve and I had a really in-depth conversation about this yesterday. 620 is kind of our threshold. Below that, we take a really in-depth look at the credit and background screen to determine, okay, is this person's credit low because they're not established? Is their credit low because they filed a bankruptcy and haven't rebuilt it? Or is it low because they just don't like paying bills? So we're getting a little bit in depth there. We'll get more to that later, I guess. But we ask them, do you have an issue with your credit score? Do you have an issue with the income? Those are the first 2 questions. Those are, believe it or not, that's where 90% of the disqualifiers come from. We ask them when they're looking to move, so that we know if their timeline fits our timeline. We ask them how many people are going to be living in the apartment. And the reason we say how many people and not how many adults and how many children, you get into a fair housing issue real fast there. So it's always how many people will be living in the apartment. A lot of times they'll tell you, oh, it's going to be me and my husband and our 2 kids. Fine. They offered that information. But if you ask how many adults and how many children, you could really run the risk of a fair housing issue. Sure. So it's all in the wording on that one. And then finally, we ask them if they have any pets, because we have a pretty strict no pets policy across most of our units. And if they say they have pets, that's generally a disqualifier right there. There's no point in showing or scheduling to show an apartment to somebody who doesn't meet your qualification criteria.
Now, with the timeline, like what's an acceptable amount of time? So if they want to move in 30 days, 60 days, or are you generally looking for someone that's able to move in right away?
Well, there's a little bit of nuance to that. People who are looking to move 30 to 60 days out are people that are planning ahead. Generally, if they're planning ahead, it means that they're probably going to be a little bit better tenant. And the reason I say that is because they're taking the time to think forward as to what they need to do. People that are looking to move as soon as possible, generally speaking, and this is, I'm kind of generalizing and I probably shouldn't, but the people that are looking to move right away, it's probably because they have a situation that they need to get themselves out of. Basically what it boils down to is, are they trying to make their problem your problem by becoming your tenant?
Coming up on the Rental Income Podcast.
We're going to bring Steve White from Rent Prep into the conversation, and we're going to have him go over an actual application that Andrew recently got on one of his rentals, and we'll decide if we should approve this person or not to move into the property. But first, it's time for a landlord pop quiz brought to you by our friends over at rentprep.com. Here's today's question. If you have a property that was built before 1978, you have to provide 2 documents to your tenants before you can sign a lease. What are those 2 documents? Well, you have to give them an approved lead-based paint pamphlet, and you also have to have them sign a lead-based paint disclosure form. Now, this is a federal law that applies to everyone, no matter what state you're in, so you need to make sure you're doing this or you can get in really big trouble. And the guys over at rentprep.com have put together a landlord care package that includes these documents as well as some other documents that you'll need to help you manage your properties better. And if you go to rentprep.com/Dan, you can get these resources for totally free. There's no catch. Just go to rentprep.com/Dan. And while you're there, you can get a 20% off promo code for their tenant screening packages. So RentPrep is a tenant screening company. They're the company that I recommend, and they're also the company that our guest, Andrew, today uses for his property. So they're a really good company. They're very thorough. They do a great job of screening. So if you are looking for some help to make sure that you're getting really good quality tenants, definitely check out RentPrep and make sure you go through rentprep.com/Dan to get your 20% off promo code and all the free resources. That's RentPrep, spelled rentprep.com/Dan. All right, let's get back to the show. So let's bring on to the show Steve White from our sponsor, RentPrep. Now, Steve, tell me, when you get an application, what's the very first thing that you're looking for?
So the first thing we do anytime we get any application is we make sure that the person is who they say they are. So we're running it just to make sure the SOCH is valid and it tracks back to the person that they say that they are. So the name's got to match with the SOCH or a variation of the name, and then date of birth, and then ideally an address match on top of that as well. So we're looking for at least 3 points of verification that this is who they say they are.
And are you verifying that against their driver's license?
Now, if there's an issue that comes up that we can't verify something, we immediately go back to the landlord and say, hey, did you grab a copy of the driver's license? Most of the time they do. But there are definitely cases where the landlord's unaware of it, and then they've got to go back and ask for the driver's license. So it is definitely a good idea to grab a copy of that driver's license always.
So on this application, did everything check out at this point?
Yeah. There was no issues with her identity or who she was. She came back an immediate pull on her credit file as well. So everything looked good at first from a glance. So
her credit seemed good. So Andrew, you've got your criteria, your minimum credit score that you've given Steve, and so she met the minimum, right?
She did, yeah.
Okay.
She when we pulled her credit, she came in. She had a 649 credit score, and our minimum threshold is a 620 credit score. So she did meet the initial qualifier. And then when we actually looked at her credit report a little bit more in depth, we noticed that she had like a collection account with a utility company for either gas or electric, and that was kind of the first sign that there was more here than meets the eye.
So tell me, what do you do? Is that because if they can't get utilities set up, they're going to have a hard time when they move in the property. So is that necessarily something that would kill that person in the screening right there at that point, or did you guys keep going?
It's one of those things that if you have a collection account with a utility company, they're not going to let you set up another account in your name until you've come up with either a payment arrangement or you've paid that collection account in full. And with this person, she was able to get some kind of a payment arrangement in place, which is why we continued with the process.
Okay, so you've gotten through that hurdle. So what did I guess, Steve, what did you look at next?
So next we're looking at criminal records.
Okay.
She came back cleared on the criminal records, but interestingly enough on this one, she had something that had just happened very recently after we had done the search. So Andrew was able to find that using a police blotter on a simple Google search, which again, always a great idea for landlords to do. You got to be very careful with something like that because it's not always going to give you very identifying information, and sometimes you might have a common name. Mm-hmm. And we got to also keep in mind we live in a society that says you're innocent until proven guilty. So a police blotter is not necessarily the end all be all, right? You could get stopped for something that you didn't do and ultimately found innocent. But therein lies the big difference between what a screening company can report and what Andrew can find on his own. He can use something like that if he found it on his own. We cannot use that because of the rules and regulations that go into what can and cannot be reported.
Okay. So, Andrew, was that a pretty serious crime that she had allegedly committed, or?
Well, here's the thing. We really have no information on it other than there was an arrest that was made about a month or so, maybe a month and a half or so before she had applied for the apartment. There was an arrest that was made by the local police department. And I saw that she had another appearance scheduled. But as far as details on the actual case, there was nothing. There's no description of the charges or anything else. So
is that enough to make you want to move on, or did you guys keep screening at that point?
Well, I think we kind of kept screening at this point. I'm pretty sure we were certain we weren't going to go with her as an applicant. Okay. We just kept moving through the process to see what else we could find. And that's when we discovered the fact that she was using fake landlords with made up property addresses.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it just kept getting deeper and deeper the more we looked into it. It was like an onion. You just kept peeling layers away of it.
Tell me that. So how did you figure out that she was using a fake landlord reference?
So we had Rent Prep enter, or we had Rent Prep do the screening, the credit, the background, and the landlord verification. And I was kind of suspicious that something was up because she said that she had the same landlord in more than one location, and now all of a sudden she's having trouble with them, so she's looking to move. So I kind of suspected something might be up, but we decided to just roll with it like we would. Mm-hmm. And Steve's company called and verified the landlord reference. And give me 1 second here. Let me just take a quick glance at that.
Well, I'll fill in a little bit of the blanks here.
Yeah, fill in a little bit of the blank while I'm reading back.
One of the questions that Andrew is adamant that we ask, which is a good question to ask, obviously in cases like this, is do you own or manage the property? Which of the two, basically? So in this case, the guy said that he owned the property. So immediately Andrew knows he's going to look for who actually owns that property at that address. Mm-hmm. And that was a real easy search for Andrew to be able to go through tax records and say, okay, something's not jiving here. This guy does not own the property. This isn't the owner. And of course, he gave the applicant a glowing review. And most times when people are lying for their friends, you're going to get just a perfect, everything is great, no issues, no problems, and they're up to speed on just enough to get by, right? Just enough to pass it.
Yeah, that's pretty common tactic. Is they'll know all the right questions or all the right answers to all the right questions until you throw them a curveball. Like, do you own or manage the property? Well, in this instance, the guy said that he owns the property. We went and looked at the tax records. The one property I don't think even existed. It wasn't a valid address. And the other address came back to like some nonprofit organization or something like that. So it was pretty obvious to me that we were dealing with a with a lying landlord.
Right.
And one of the other questions that's really easy to trip people up in is, for instance, this tenant gave us a rental amount of $550 on one apartment and $500 on the other apartment. So if we were to call them and do a landlord reference, if I think we might have somebody who's trying to pull a fast one, I'll just completely misstate the rent amount, or I'll ask them to state it to me. So I'll tell them, she said she was renting from you and that she was paying $650 a month. Well, if the guy says, oh yeah, she was paying $650 a month, but I actually have $5 or $550 on paper, that's another red flag that we might be getting a landlord reference. It's not actually a landlord.
Right. They should know the rent that, but I guess, if you're calling, maybe the person hasn't lived there in 3 years. And if the landlord has a ton of properties, they may not know that off the top of their head.
I agree. The one that honestly trips people up the most that we're constantly shocked by here is the address. I mean, think about it.
Okay, yeah. You're going to know the address.
How many friends do you know how to get to their house? You've been to their house, but you don't actually know the physical address of the house.
Right.
And that's something that we trip people up on all the time. Now, looking at that pretty, objectively, as a landlord, you know all your addresses. I don't care how many properties you own. You know the addresses to those properties.
Right.
And even if you don't know the exact address, I might be able to give you something and say, like, it was in Lockport, New York. And the guy goes, oh, yeah, that was on this street or that street. If they don't know, we usually, the screeners do this day in and day out. They usually have a pretty good meter. Now, obviously, there's what we call professional tenants, people that can fool the system. There's no doubt. But on a casual, this person just has a friend pick up the phone type of a thing. This is something that trips a lot of them up, and it's pretty funny to think that it's something as simple as the address, that they just don't know it.
Right. So Andrew, you've obviously got a tenant that's lying to you about the rental references. You've got something going on with the criminal history that may or may not be anything. Is this at this point where you like, okay, we're going to keep looking, or was there anything else that?
I don't know if there was anything else on this one or not. I think eventually we just got fed up with dealing with her and decided to decline the application and just move on. I mean, it was pretty clear to us that she wasn't going to be the right tenant for us.
Right.
There were several red flags that popped up over the course. She was in a rush to get into the apartment. The landlord reference didn't match up.
I don't think she met your income criteria either. We got a really specific amount from the employer. Right down to the dollar. It was an odd number, and I think when you added that up, I don't think that hit your income criteria either.
She was just short on the income. Actually, she was short by about $200. It would have put her at a 39% rent to income ratio. On this particular apartment, it's $500 a month. It's a studio. It's small. It's $500 a month, which included the water and the electric. So knowing that she only had one utility to pay, just the gas bill was what she was going to have to pay, I probably would have let that one slide, because I think that she probably would have been okay income wise. It was just everything else on the application was a total lie, basically.
Well, good job, both of you. Great job in screening this tenant out, because Andrew, this probably would have been a nightmare for you if she had moved in the property.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So screening is so important. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on the show. If anyone wants to contact you, give me the best way for someone to reach out to both of you.
Rentprep.com for us. We've got live chat, email, any way you want to reach us. Rentprep.com is sort of the main hub to get to us.
And Andrew?
Yep. If you want to find anything about Realty Edge or Buffalo rental properties or anything like that, your best bet right now is to hit us up on Facebook, which is going to be facebook.com/Buffalo foreclosed with a D homes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. We'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday. My name is Dan Lane, and this has been the Rental Income Podcast.